Every new season brings performance question marks. But heading into the 2026 era, one issue has surfaced earlier than expected: allegations that Red Bull may not be showing their true potential. During the early days of testing in Bahrain, the RB22 looked composed. Reliability appeared strong, energy deployment seemed efficient, and there were no obvious signs that their first in-house power unit project was struggling. For a team building its own engine from scratch in partnership with Ford, that alone was significant. However, the narrative shifted once discussion around Red Bull's apparent competitiveness began to grow. Williams team principal James Vowles stated that Red Bull seemed to have turned the power down after attention focused on the strength of their engine. That comment immediately fueled speculation. Is this a familiar tactic designed to manage expectations? Or is there something more deliberate at play ahead of the opening round? In modern Formula One, data can be shaped through fuel loads, engine modes, and carefully structured run plans. No team reveals its full hand during testing, yet when a rival team principal makes such a pointed remark, the situation carries more weight. If Red Bull are indeed faster than they are publicly suggesting, the competitive order for 2026 may look very different from the narrative currently being constructed. But if they are not, then this becomes part of the usual psychological positioning before the season begins. So, are Red Bull simply being cautious, or are they playing a larger strategic game? Subscribe now, because we are about to examine every available indicator and determine who truly benefits from this situation. To understand why Vowles' comment matters, we need to rewind slightly. Red Bull entered this regulation cycle under a cloud of uncertainty. The team has built its first power unit in-house through Red Bull Powertrains, in collaboration with Ford. Just 4 years ago, that operation was effectively a construction site in Milton Keynes. Now it is responsible for delivering a competitive hybrid package in what is arguably the most complex regulatory reset in modern Formula One history. Expectations externally were measured at best. A new manufacturer typically suffers reliability issues, correlation gaps, and performance shortfalls in its early phase. Yet across 6 days of testing in Bahrain, the RB22 ran with very few visible problems. Max Verstappen himself reflected positively on that aspect, saying, "All in all, with a positive feeling, we actually had very few issues. I think it's quite remarkable that we've managed to get everything so well organized with a new engine and so many new people." That is not the language of a team firefighting fundamental problems. It is the language of a project that, at minimum, is operationally under control. And yet Verstappen was also careful to temper expectations. If you then look at the performance, I do think we still need to take a step forward to truly fight at the front. At this moment, I don't think we'll be competing for victory. That caveat is important. Red Bull's public stance has consistently been that Mercedes and Ferrari appear stronger at this stage. James Vowles does not entirely accept that narrative. Speaking to F1 TV, he said, "There are games being played. Red Bull looked really good until we spoke about their power unit. Then they've turned it down quite a bit since then." The timing, in his view, was not coincidental. Testing form is notoriously deceptive. Fuel loads are rarely disclosed. Engine modes can be varied from run to run. A team might simulate race conditions one afternoon and conduct systems checks the next. It is entirely plausible for lap times to fluctuate without implying strategic concealment. But Vowles' phrasing suggested observation rather than guesswork. He implied a visible shift in behavior after public scrutiny increased. The context matters. Under the 2026 regulations, the power unit architecture has shifted to a 50-50 split between internal combustion and electric power. The MGUH has been removed. Energy deployment and battery management have become central performance variables. Drivers have been seen aggressively lift and coasting at the end of long straights, downshifting deliberately to harvest energy, and modifying throttle application in low-speed corners to manage state of charge. Nicholas Tombazis, the FIA's single-seater director, has acknowledged that these changes bring complexity. "We are completely conscious that we may need to make adjustments," he said, adding that the governing body is fully open to addressing driver concerns. However, he also emphasized that any changes would not be drastic and must go through the formal governance process. The FIA believes it has completed 90% of the work needed to reach a reasonable balance. Within that framework, energy deployment becomes not just a technical parameter, but a competitive differentiator. Superior efficiency in harvesting and deploying electrical power can mask underlying deficits in combustion output. Conversely, strong combustion performance may allow a team to run more conservative electrical modes without losing lap time. If Red Bull's system is particularly robust in this area, as some in the paddock suspect, it would make sense not to advertise the full extent of that advantage in February. Steve Nielsen of Alpine offered a candid perspective on how rivals interpret such scenarios. "We're shameless plagiarists, all of us," he said. "We'll look at anything anybody else can do on the track, off the track, and if we like it, we'll steal it." In other words, if Red Bull have found something effective in energy deployment or power management, the rest of the field will study it relentlessly. That creates an incentive for discretion. At the same time, it would be simplistic to assume Red Bull are comfortably ahead. Verstappen has been openly critical of the new generation of cars, describing them as not really enjoyable and previously likening them to Formula E on steroids. His reservations focus on the increased emphasis on management. "I think the word that you can use for the whole year will be management," he said, calling it his least favourite era of regulations. These are not the comments of a driver brimming with confidence about dominance. He has been clear that results alone will not determine his satisfaction. "It has nothing to do with my results. At the end of the day, it has to remain fun." That mindset complicates the narrative. A team that is strategically hiding pace would normally project quiet assurance. Red Bull's messaging has instead been measured, even cautious. Jost Capito offered another layer to this discussion. He described Verstappen's race intelligence as exceptional and suggested that the new energy-heavy regulations could present a double-edged sword. Strategy, battery efficiency, and behavioral optimization may matter more than outright lap time. In such an environment, a driver who understands systems as deeply as Verstappen potentially gains an edge. Capito also warned against reading too much into Bahrain testing. The tests in Bahrain must be viewed with caution. Nobody is showing their full hand. That statement aligns with historical precedent. Pre-season has often misled observers, sometimes dramatically. There is also the broader competitive picture. Vowles praised Ferrari's innovation, referencing its rotating flip wing, and acknowledged Mercedes' strong early showing. He noted that depending on what games people are playing on power unit and fuel, it's hard to tell. That ambiguity cuts both ways. If Red Bull are hiding something, so might others. The underlying question is motive. What would Red Bull gain by appearing slower? Managing expectation is one aspect. Entering the opening race as an underdog can reduce external pressure. It can also influence development direction among rivals. If competitors believe Red Bull are struggling, they may focus resources elsewhere. Conversely, if Red Bull appear dominant, they become the benchmark everyone chases. There is also a political dimension. In a regulatory environment still subject to refinement, perceived competitive imbalance can influence conversations about adjustments. Tom Bazis has made clear that the FIA is listening. If Red Bull were seen as excessively strong in a particular area, it could shape how future tweaks are framed. Yet none of this proves intent. It is equally plausible that Red Bull experimented with higher engine modes early in testing to validate systems, then reverted to conservative settings once sufficient data had been gathered. Reliability remains paramount, especially for a new power unit program. Preserving mileage and minimizing stress before the first race would be a rational decision. Verstappen himself admitted uncertainty about absolute performance. "Is it fast enough? I have no idea. We have to wait and see." That doesn't sound like a driver fully aware of a concealed advantage. It sounds like someone still assessing where his team stands in a reshaped competitive landscape. Ultimately, the accusation of sandbagging rests on interpretation rather than evidence. Vowles' comment introduced the idea publicly. The observable fluctuations in pace give it oxygen. But testing times absent context are blunt instruments. What is undeniable is that Red Bull have exceeded expectations in terms of operational readiness. Their power unit has not imploded under scrutiny. Their deployment appears sophisticated. Their driver remains one of the most analytically astute in the field. Whether that translates into concealed superiority or simply competent preparation will only become clear in qualifying trim. When the lights go out in Melbourne, fuel loads will be equalised by regulation, engine modes will be pushed, and competitive masks will begin to slip. Only then will we see whether the suspicion voiced in Bahrain had substance. So, what do you think? Have Red Bull already positioned themselves ahead of the field while convincing everyone they are not? Or is this merely the usual pre-season paranoia, amplified by a radical new rule set? Let me know your view in the comments, because this debate is only just beginning.